Welcome to Intelligence in Action series. I'm GK, and today I'm diving into something that's been on the top of my mind for so many years while I have been working in compliance. Journey from AI potential to real-world impact. As you know, now that the hype around AI has started to cool down a bit, or at least the focus has been shifted a little bit, it's now about whether AI can it's not anymore about whether or not AI can help. It's about how it actually to make it work. And that is where things get tricky. When it comes to compliance, implementing AI isn't just about installing new tech. There are so many hidden intelligence, things you might not even realize that it could drain your efforts. Let me throw a start at you. Over 60% of compliance leaders admit they struggle to define actionable AI use cases. That's huge, right? And it's not just about finding the right use cases. Even when you do, you're bound to run into roadblocks, unexpected hurdles that can be stop process in its track. So now, how do you navigate these challenges? What do you need to think about upfront to get it right? This is exactly what we're going to explore today. We're going to talk about what really matters when re-engineering compliance processes, often the underestimated importance of change management, and whether even addressing the right, whether we are addressing the right problems in the first place. The goal of this is to give potential impact, insight into help you moving forward confidently. To unpack this all, I'm thrilled to be joined by two amazing guests from Oliver Wyman, David Choi and David Carretero. Between them, they have been working with some of the biggest organizations in the world, helping them navigate the complexity of AI and compliance. David and David, welcome to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with the big picture. AI has been definitely through its hype cycle. And I would actually argue that it has a mini dip at the moment, and we're about to hit a new one, but we will talk about that in the end of the session. You know, David Choi, I would love to hear your take on how this hype cycle has influenced the way that clients are thinking about AI in the compliance world today.
Yeah, GK, it's a great point. I'd agree with you that the initial hype from a couple of years ago has died down, where people aren't just clamoring for AI for the sake of AI. But what we have seen really settle down is, I'm not sure if I would call it a dip. I think it's just gone into a little bit of a quieter period as people are really starting to prep and get into the hard work of implementing and deploying AI in their environment. And so I'd highlight two things. One is we are seeing slight differences in machine learning versus Gen AI. So on the Gen AI side, I think there's a lot of good, cautious burdens that are being put on organizations. So things like policies, information security requirements, reviews from enterprise councils, and things that we'll talk about. All very good things, but they are naturally slowing down the adoption cycle slightly. I think but we are seeing a lot of people in pilot and proof of concept stages. And so while we're not seeing a lot of production use cases, at least in compliance, we are fully expecting that the deployment into larger scale production is just around the corner, because a number of our clients are working on pilots and POCs, which are absolutely critical to vetting out the use cases and the technology, as you rightfully pointed out. We're seeing something slightly different, though, on the machine learning side. So I know that the hype cycle around machine learning isn't the same as Gen AI, but what's been interesting to see for us is that a lot of the use cases around machine learning have really started to accelerate after people got more comfortable with some of the Gen AI type of things that were happening. So like a good example of that is in transaction monitoring, where, as you probably well know, many firms are still largely using rules-based solutions, which are still have high volumes of false positive alerts that are coming through. And in most cases, many firms have adopted machine learning in addition to their rules-based systems. And that's been happening for a number of years, but we're now starting to see leaders move into actually replacing their rules-based systems with machine learning. So I think the adoption cycle is really accelerating on all sides. And I agree with you. It feels maybe a little bit quieter right now, but I think it's because a lot of work is actually being done on the pilots and POCs, which really portend a lot of production deployment over the next 12, 18 plus months.
Interesting. So if we dive into maybe thinking about the client, what should be maybe some of the first steps for companies that is it to take when starting to think about AI and compliance? You know, you talked about machine learning, of course. You know, that is, you know, that has been close to my heart for many years, and you know, and more importantly, maybe, you know, when you were thinking about AI and the next steps, what would the two of you be recommending the clients to think about?
Yeah, I mean, I can start here and David can chime in, I think, here as we go. But about a year or so ago, we heard a lot about like the strategy and use cases for AI. So first identifying where it could actually be applied. And we're hearing a lot about like the business cases and the ROI. So I think that's still largely the first steps, is to make sure that you know where you're actually going to apply it and that there's some tangible benefits to be gained there. But as I mentioned earlier, I think what we're also starting to see is many people shift into the harder work of determining how they actually need to deploy these. So everything from the technology, the data, the InfoSec requirements, the governance, and even just, you know, getting the right team members organized around it.
I'd add, I think one of the important things for companies to do is as they get their arms wrapped around the, you know, governance and use case prioritization that David was just talking about, also democratizing the use of AI across your organization, right? Getting a tool like Microsoft Copilot in the hands of your employee base to have them play around with it and get used to it and understand what it's good at, what it can help them do, will allow you to build some excitement and some momentum amongst the employees, that they can actually genuinely see and experience the value that it has for them. And it serves a dual purpose where it also allows you to source new use cases from your employees directly, right? So you're not just restricted to folks who are maybe data scientists or narrowly focused on, you know, hey, you know, let's come up with some use cases. You sort of democratize the ability to identify new use cases and put them in the queue, as it were. But I think you also need to make sure that you're going beyond just that sort of generic platform, right? Where you're also enabling more complex or more nuanced use cases and working with, particularly for compliance teams, working with your counterparts in the business, working with your counterparts in IT, in model risk management, to ensure that you're identifying the right use cases that allow you to show quick wins and demonstrate momentum across the org.
I love that, because you know, when you think about use cases, you know, often we techies and so on, we think that just like, hey, it's obvious and so on. And I have been guilty about that for years. I've been in this AI world for many years, and I often say I thank Sam Altman and the OpenAI team so much for bringing out OpenAI, that allowed it to start to speak to AI and see the real world value of it, and really I think I applaud that kind of notion to give AI to your employees, because the use cases and maybe not the solutions, but some of the use cases can be born out of just freeing up people to actually allow them to do that. And David,
Yeah.
you're saying something.
I was going to say, I think this is also not just born out of the advice we're giving to our clients. We're actually living it ourselves. Here at Oliver Wyman, like, we actually have an environment that's been set up. You know, it's going through a secure location. Everyone's allowed to access it. We've built an interface. It's of course called OWL, OWL, to kind of reflect our initials. But to David's point, we actually, our teams are using it. We're using it when we're building out our use cases. We have that, and our teams kind of come with ideas, exactly to your point, GK, of what that is. And we've seen real tangible benefits from it. And it is, as you said, something we're advising our clients on, but it's also something that we're actually tangibly seeing the benefits of ourselves personally.
Yeah, I echo that. In Lucinity, we encourage everyone to use AI. Just to give you an example, everything that we do in marketing, that's all AI. And, we're not just talking about products here and so on. So, David, with so many possibilities of the impact of AI, how can organizations start to identify AI use cases that actually will bring real value and not just cool excitement?
Yeah, I'll start here, and David and I have been working on so many different use cases. We can touch on a few that we're starting to see real excitement over. To the point that I was saying before, many firms have done some of that crowdsourcing of ideas, and they've started to prioritize it. The ones that I'd highlight as we're seeing some real traction on, one is around regulatory change management. So as you know, many firms are having to adjust to all of the different regulators that they're working with, the different regulations that they need to adhere to based on their business lines, their product offerings, the geographies and jurisdictions in which they operate. And so managing that is a bit of a cumbersome process, as you might imagine. And so, a lot of times parts of that are being done manually, specifically where firms are having to determine whether or not they feel they are covering the regulations that they're subscribed to adequately with their policies, with their controls and their procedures. And a lot of times there's a judgment-based angle to that. That's been one use case that we've seen a lot of interest in by using Gen AI to actually help. And again, this is an important point, I would say, not using the Gen AI to make the decisions, but to help actually identify in the number of different policies and procedures and controls that typically exist at these large complex financial institutions, which are the appropriate ones that adhere to the regulations, and are there any gaps that we're looking at? That's been a key one. David, maybe you want to hit on a few of the others that we're seeing a lot of traction in as well.
Yeah, well, actually, extending right from that, when it comes to policies and controls, that's an area where we see a lot of interest in using generative AI, large language models specifically, to help to sort of streamline and simplify your, policy and control inventories, right? And so using large language models to sort of rationalize, let's say, your controls, right, and be able to reduce reduce the number of controls that you have, right, which ultimately allows you to reduce costs, right, because you have fewer controls that you need to maintain and execute, but also using AI to identify controls that can be automated, right? So looking for that sort of efficiency angle and effectiveness angle, right? It's kind of both.
So for example, can you name me an example of those efficiencies? Is that on the investigation, on the triage, or identity? Where are you seeing the most excitement there?
I think so. We've actually, and David can chime in here as well. We've actually done some time and motion studies to understand, where are people spending their time, sort of pre-AI, if you will, and where are people spending their time post-AI. And we've done that both with clients, and we've done that to ourselves as well. As David said, we have our own AI platform that we've rolled out across the company, and so we've been able to actually measure, right, what are the actual efficiencies that we're gaining from leveraging AI tools. So I'll talk a little bit about our sort of own measured metrics, and then maybe David, you can talk about what we're seeing with some clients. Internally, what we've been seeing is that on tasks that our consulting teams, our project teams are doing on a routine basis, we've been able to measure time savings of anywhere between 20 and 90% time savings. It is astonishing how much you can accelerate people's work when you use generative AI.
Yeah, and on the investigation side, GK, I think we've seen interest in that all across the board in financial crime. So everything from transaction monitoring investigations, sanctions investigations, and even KYC in particular, I would say. But as I was saying earlier, I think we're still in the early stages of people trying to identify where to use it and how to use it. And the two or three areas that I'd highlight, first, First has been around data collection. So there's a lot of time being spent on things like collecting data, aggregating data, summarizing data, and then summarizing the case and pulling out kind of the specific risk areas that analysts need to look at. The wording here isn't precise, but I think generally people would say that those are lower value activities in the value chain, and they would really prefer to have their analysts kind of reviewing the case, reviewing the risks, and then making a final determination and really kind of understanding what's happening, rather than more of the more basic tasks of data collection and writing up some of these things. And so what David said, the time and motion stuff that we've done has shown that really the majority of the time is being spent on things like data collection and write-ups, and a very small amount of time is being spent on actually being able to review what's happening in the case and what the risks are, and making final judgments on that on behalf of the institution. And so we see as exactly as we were saying, the opportunity to kind of free people up to do those things, which I think are the higher value activities, and where rightfully I would say you don't want the AI to actually make those decisions for you. I think you still will want compliance professionals to be in charge of those final risk decisionings. That's been a key area that we've been seeing a lot of. Similarly, we're also seeing a lot of interest in using AI for QA and QC. So right now, in a lot of compliance departments, particularly around the investigation space, you are seeing people still do sample-based reviews, pulling up cases that have already been performed and having a secondary review, maybe look at a 10% sample, a 20% sample, something along those lines. And what we've been seeing is using opportunities to use AI to actually do QA, QC of 100% of the population, and doing it more in real time and following kind of a strict process or a procedure or a discipline procedure to make sure that it works. And again, you still need to have somebody review the QC that's being performed by the machine, but it significantly kind of improves the overall quality and the effectiveness of what's being done.
Yeah, and this is exactly what we in Lucinity have seen. We've seen this maturity, and David, I agree with you, and I'm not surprised actually with the 90% number. We see that, and the summary of the case, just having these little things just pop up, and you don't need to go to various kinds of systems. It matters to the users, and like you said, David, I think that I think there will be another hype cycle, as we are talking just about hype cycle so much today, on the QC element, on agents starting to be able to review the whole case. And I think that it will start with quality assurance, because that is where us compliance people will have comfort with having a review, someone to challenge the humans. So I think from my perspective, you're spot on. So let's go into a little bit of more of a, I'm not going to say controversial thing, but it has always been controversial in compliance. Almost the bad word of ROI, or return of investment. How should we be thinking about ROI in the world of AI right now? Is there anything specific that you would recommend to your clients when it comes to that framework?
Yeah, and it's a great question, because I think it's very specifically about ROI and compliance. I think when people think about Gen AI ROI, the immediate words that come to their mind are things like efficiency, customer experience, things of that nature. But in compliance, we've been advising that it is different. The goal here isn't pure efficiency. The QA QC example that we were just talking about, GK, is a really good example of that. Yes, there are efficiencies to be gained by using the machines instead of just the humans, but one of the key points has been emphasizing the improvement of the quality of the program and the effectiveness of the program first. I think the ROI of that has to be first and foremost for any compliance teams that are contemplating AI use cases. The QA/QC one is a great example. You go from doing a 10-20% sample review to 100% sample to 100%. No, there is no sample. It's just 100% review. You're improving the quality of what you're doing on the QA/QC, and then you're freeing up the people's time in order to maybe focus on higher value activities. And so in our view, efficiency is important, but it should be more almost a byproduct of the effectiveness improvements that are being made. And to kind of show how, yes, you're saving time here, but you're also increasing what's being done, or you're spending more time on areas that maybe people didn't have the time to do. And that has been a very nuanced and important case for compliance teams, because if you go just from a purely let's do a cost savings exercise, I think there's some rightfully important questions to answer, whether it's from your regulators or audit teams or others, as to whether or not you're not doing the things to the right level that you are. And so again, in short, we really focus on the effectiveness of the improvement of the effectiveness of the program first and foremost, and then the efficiency pieces that come alongside of that.
Fantastic. So let's now go a little bit into the challenges and what you will need to overcome. What are the most common pitfalls, challenges that organization, or maybe I wouldn't say organization, I would say teams face when implementing AI?
So I'll start here with two common challenges that we see. The first is the technology itself. We see some companies deploy generic AI platforms, and I don't want to single them out exactly, but like if you think about Microsoft Copilot, right? It's a great tool, but when you are limited to just a sort of chatbot-esque type of interface that allows you to use AI in a certain subset of use cases, and that's great, but it doesn't allow you to deploy more complicated or more interesting, in my opinion, use cases that you would need to actually interface directly with a large language model. So one is sort of the technology enablement aspect of it, making sure that you do have that more sort of generic, general tool, but also making sure that you have something that is flexible and can be customized to accommodate more complex and interesting use cases. The second is we often see that firms are underestimating the amount of change management and training that are required to utilize AI both sort of safely and effectively, right? I'd go so far as to say that deploying the software, the AI itself, that's the easy part, right? The hard part is how do you embed that technology into people's daily lives, into their workflows, into the processes that exist today, or maybe even adapt the processes that exist today to allow people to use these new tools in a way that is both, like I said, sort of safe and effective. Because the reality is that generative AI in particular, it's different than the way that we're used to working with computers, right? We're used to working with computers and computer programs, and they're really good at math, and they're perfect at sort of data recall, and that's not what generative AI is good at. It's good at different things, and so we need to learn how to work with these tools in a different way. So that whole sort of change management, education, and training aspect is another area that we typically see as a challenge.
Interesting. So what I'm hearing then is, AI, it's here to come, but the good old saying of change management, and I actually talked about that on my prior webinar with prior Chief Compliance Officer Airbnb that has yet to air now. And I asked him a very, the same question as I'm asking you. When it comes to change management efforts, what are the critical in change management? What are the critical things for success? We talk about the people change, et cetera, but what are the kind of top 3 things that how to run a successful change management program?
We think about it in this way. You have to think about change management in terms of both sort of top down as well as bottom up. Right? So from a top-down perspective, you need to have executive sponsorship and support. If you don't have that, then you're not going anywhere, right? You need to ensure that you've got executives who are pushing the technology to be in place, who are pushing for those sort of operational changes, process changes an overall change management program, right, to happen in the first place. But bottom up, you're also wanting to, like I said before, sort of have this general platform, general AI that everybody can use so that you start to identify your change champions, right? The people who are going to be your sort of beacons of success that allow you to tell stories, right? And help maintain momentum and say, oh, look at, John Smith, right, in this department who used AI to shave, 3 hours off his day, right? That sort of bottom up storytelling and immersion and engagement is also sort of a critical piece. So that's how we think about it, right? Is this sort of top down, making sure that leadership is clearing the way, right, and giving people the sort of tools for success, but also the sort of bottom up engagement with the tooling itself.
Fantastic, and I love the fact that it's storytelling. It's this raw human emotion of storytelling, which actually large language models are extremely good at kind of helping us to think about them, but it is this human creation that we need to remember that we are still human. It's not just about the AI. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'd add a couple things in terms of the other lessons learned that we had is, adding to what David was saying. First off, I think there's always a misperception that it's going to be add this technology, deploy it in 6 months, 12 months, you get the ROI and you move on. It's typically a multi-year journey is what we've been seeing. And I suspect that it won't really slow down. And that's not because the technology is necessarily hard to deploy. It's just that you start in one area and it continues to expand and grow and develop. And so I think sometimes people underestimate how long the journey will really, really be. And I think that emphasizes, the point that David was making about having senior people involved, making sure the communications is clear all the way through. I think the other angle on that, a very subtle nuance, but a very critical one, is getting the regulators engaged early and often. So they're not just the team that you're updating, once you've got the use cases and you start doing the deployment and the testing. Given how new this technology is, I think it's important to treat them as the way that you do your business stakeholders, your technology stakeholders, your senior management. There's a number of people, and the regulators are a very, very important part of that, group of folks that you need to get engaged early and really keep them engaged throughout the process versus just a periodic update that you give whenever you're kind of ready to go. I think the other thing I would tell you, lastly, the part that I feel that people do underestimate is how much their actual processes are going to have to change. Because I do think that there's a perception that it's a matter of replacing technology A with technology B that works better. And I don't think that that's always the case. It might be in more simplistic use cases. But, we were talking about like machine learning for transaction monitoring earlier. And I mean, GK, when you change from a rules-based to a machine learning-based, without going into all of the specifics, like all of the processes you have around coverage assessments and red flags and indicators, and even the investigations process and the investigations, the seniority and the experience level of the investigations team that now are reviewing cases that are coming from ML models versus rules-based models is completely different. And so I think that sometimes there's a tendency to believe that you're replacing a mousetrap with a slightly better mousetrap. And in fact, you're fundamentally changing how your organization is going to have to work from end to end, from risk assessment all the way through investigations, feedback loops, engaging with model risk management and audit. And so that is partially why that journey takes a little bit of time. But it's also something that we've seen people perhaps underestimate when they first undertake like a pilot or a proof of concept, and then being able to kind of scale that into a broader deployment as well.
So David, we have known each other for years, and I don't know if I've ever told you the story of why I founded Lucinity and selected the infinite loop for Lucinity. And it's not the most innovative logo that you can find. That was actually born out of this, what you just said, that when I have done in my prior jobs, in my prior life, machine learning projects. We ended up reducing false positives but increasing true positives. That decreased the need for triage, but increased massively the need for investigations. And investigations are inherently just more expensive than triage, and therefore the overall the compliance costs went up. And I think you're absolutely right in calling out the need for thinking about the transaction monitoring transformation here and machine learning. We finally have the technology on the front end now to be able to cope with the revolution of the machine learning. And I think those two technologies, large language model, Gen AI on the front end, transaction monitoring with a steady, provable machine learning, I think it's the yin and yang technology that we have been waiting for years. So that is kind of like, I feel that is 2024. And as we are coming up to Christmas, let's spend maybe 2 or 3 minutes before we break off on what is beyond 2025, or maybe we can't even say beyond 2025. What's in it for, what is in the Christmas kind of, or the holiday packets for 2025? What are you thinking about now that we're not yet implementing?
Yeah, I mean, I think to continue on from some of the points that we've been making, GK, I think that, a lot of the pilots and the proof of concepts, we're starting to convert more, we're seeing conversions more into broader production deployments. Having said that, I think we're still going to be in a situation where many firms are still doing proof of concepts and pilots as each of the use cases come through and they start to scale up. And look at the changes that they're looking at. And to your last point there around really being able to focus in on the areas that you want with better technology, I perhaps am optimistic in believing that this technology will start to get adopted more broadly, because fundamentally it helps banks identify risk better and improve their risk profile. And that ultimately is what the goal of all of this is. Like we all love technology here. But there is an actual objective, which is that the job of these teams is actually to help the banks manage their risks. And I don't think I'm completely out of place in saying that the technology that's being used now could be much improved in order to improve the risk management. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that we will be able to get back to some of those principles and really focus in on those and see how technology can truly fundamentally help on those, as you were rightfully pointing out.
So
yeah,
David, what you're thinking is, let's go live in 2025. David, anything from what is exciting you?
Yeah, no, I think along the lines of actually what David said, I think what I see in 2025, as we move some of these use cases in compliance into production, AI will be a catalyst for a broader compliance transformation, right? It's just one tool in the toolbox, but as we see AI start to be deployed and these processes start to be adapted, we'll see a shift, the start of a shift, right? It'll be a multi-year journey, but I think in 2025, we'll see the start of a shift from a reactive to a more proactive risk management approach, right, in compliance.
Fantastic. I for sure look forward to 2025. And David, thank you so much for your perspective here today. Thank you for spending time here with me, and I look forward to meeting over coffee soon in New York. Thank you.
Thank you.